Okay, so in your notes, the very front page has us actually says lesson 6 would be Buddhism. That's been changed because I realized that it will help us to understand Buddhism if we cover Hinduism first, because Buddhism came out of Hinduism. Siddhartha, who we call Buddha, was actually Hindu before he started Buddhism. So we are doing Hinduism tonight. Okay, does anybody in here actually ever known, met, had been friends with any Hindu people? This is one that hits home for me because one of my best friends in high school, and still one of my best friends today, is Hindu. Very good guy, love him to death. I just wish he knew Christ, but he's a Hindu guy. So here's the thing about Hinduism is, well, it's really true of a lot of the religions we've talked about here. To some extent, it's true of Christianity because Christianity has been around for 2,000 years. The older a religion is, typically the more variation you have within it. In other words, it's really hard to just say, well, they do this, 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 and this, and that's it, and sum it up really, because as time has gone on, it's spread out. Think about all the different denominations you have in Christianity over the years. All right, now Christianity is still, for the most part, unified on the essential doctrines, but the longer it goes, the more variant you have. Well, that's true of Christianity. To some degree, that's true of Judaism and Islam. That is especially true of Hinduism and Buddhism, as we'll see next week. There's a lot of variance. I would say probably more so than any other religion, there is varying beliefs in Hinduism. So I guess the best way to describe it is giving a short, concise, accurate summation of Hinduism is kind of like nailing Jell-O to a wall. It's not an easy thing to do. So what we're just going to talk about tonight is some of the history, some of the beliefs that you will find for the most part across Hinduism, and some things you find in some select areas. So let's start off talking about some famous Hindus. Few famous Hindus. Actually, there's only about 4 of them I have up here tonight. They're a little harder to come across. Anybody know Ricky Williams? Football player. I think he became a Hindu. He started practicing like yoga, which is like comes out of Hinduism. I believe he started practicing yoga with like an injury to try and get over an injury or something, or stretch out so he wouldn't get injured. I don't know, something like that. And that's how he, I think that may be how he first got interested into it. Of course, Mahatma Gandhi is probably the best known Hindu, probably ever in all of history for the most part, at least to 20th, 21st century people. Anybody know Julia Roberts was Hindu? You did know that? Yeah. And we see this especially next week with Buddhism, but in the West here, in the Western world, we have this huge fascination with Eastern world and Eastern philosophy and religion. And we just think, oh, it's this amazing, mystical, wonderful thing. For the most part, that's because here in the West, we're pretty ignorant of the East. We don't really know everything in their religion and everything they believe, but we do sort of have this fascination with it. And you find that even among higher-ups, famous people like Julia Roberts. Anybody know Russell Brand? Couple people. He's best known as, he's an activist, right? That's what I think. What else does he do? Has he been in movies, too? Been in movies, actor. Yeah. Arthur. Okay. Oh, I didn't see that one. I didn't hear about that one. Okay. Yeah, well, Russell Brand, he's a British guy originally. So, yeah. So anyway, all these people consider themselves Hindu. I could have put Shaquille O'Neal up there, but Shaquille O'Neal doesn't consider himself just Hindu. He considers himself everything, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But so we don't put people like that up there. All right. Before we get into Hinduism, to really get into it, let's talk about the concept of just theism in general. Theism is basically belief in God, gods, anything. If you believe in some sort of supreme deity, you are a theist, right? And there's all these different types of theism. Of course, monotheism is belief in only one God. There are 3 religions in the world right now that are 3 major monotheistic religions. What are those? Christianity is one. Islam's another. Yep, Judaism. Those are the 3 basic ones. And by the way, you're talking strictly logically, rationally speaking, only a monotheistic religion really is rational. So if any religion is true, it would have to be one of those three, by the way, which of course we believe is Christianity. But yeah, monotheism, for the most part, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. Polytheism, of course, mono means one, poly means many. Polytheism, belief in many gods. Henotheism, that's not a term you hear often, but henotheism is what you find a lot in the Old Testament times among the pagan nations around Israel, and to some extent even in Israel. It's a belief in a lot of different gods, so it's like a polytheistic base with a monotheistic emphasis. So you believe in a lot of gods, but you only worship one. Can you guys think of any group we've studied here that would make you, that sounds like henotheism? Anything we've studied in this class? They believe in lots of gods, but they really only focus on and worship one. What's that? Scientology, not necessarily Scientology. Scientology just has a vague thing about God. Mormonism is one of the best examples of henotheism today, because Mormons believe in a lot of gods, but they just believe for our planet there's only one. Go to another planet, you can worship another one, but for our planet it's just one. Okay. Pantheism, sort of belief that everything is God. Panentheism is the belief that God is in everything, subtle difference. And animism is kind of like a general spirit worship. You believe that there's gods and spirits everywhere and you have to appease them. Japanese Shinto is a great example of animism. So just looking at these, if you had to guess, which one would you guess Hinduism is? Just, I'm not gonna criticize you if you're wrong. Just give me a guess. What would you guess? Pantheism? Any other guesses? Polytheism? Any others? Yeah, pantheism, polytheism. Certainly seems like it. Okay, you want to know which one Hinduism is? You ready? The answer is yes. Hinduism has, that's a piece of jello nailed to a wall, by the way. Hinduism has influences of all of these. You can go some places, all right, so you say pantheism. Chances are you've met a Hindu in your life before who has some influence of pantheism. And chances are you've probably met a Hindu who's had some sort of influence of polytheism. You can go some places and find a strange mix of polytheism and monotheism. You can go other places and find a strange mix of animism and pantheism. It's strange. It's hard to nail it down, but you have influences all over. Like I said, from the very beginning, it's just been changing all these different areas, and it's hard to nail it down. So, Hinduism even is difficult to nail down as far as theism. Let's talk about the history of Hinduism, though. There's been three main movements, and I guess you might call them ways in Hinduism. First one was back in 1500s when Hinduism really began to pop up as a religion. That was the way of works. The way of works was a big emphasis on the right ritualistic observance, on doing the right things at the temple, doing certain things to worship God. It was all ritual, very centered around the priest, or Brahmins as they call them. Around 500, you had sort of a rebellion against that not a physical fight rebellion, but you had sort of a turning away from that type of legalistic approach, and they went into a more mystical approach called the way of knowledge. And this was all about meditation. It was trying to recognize your true self. And so that was a big change from the established form of Hinduism. And then around 200 BC, and again in 800 AD, you had this big emphasis on devotion, the way of devotion. And this emphasized basically just picking a god or a goddess and attaching yourself and worshiping that one very fervently. You might worship some others on the side, but mostly you focus on this one and worship it very fervently. Now, it gets more complicated than this. You can't just find a Hindu person and put them into one of these three classes, because you had the way of works come along. If you'd go back a few slides there, dear. You have the way of works come along, and in the way of works, you had this one way of doing things, and then you had the way of knowledge come along, and the way of works influenced the way of knowledge, and the way of knowledge went back and influenced some people who were still thinking in the way of works, and then you had the way of devotion come along, and they were influencing back and forth. So all of them are influenced by each other. So again, it's really hard to nail it down specifically. Let's talk real briefly about each of these, though, movements, and they'll kind of help you understand the direction Hinduism's taken, though, in the past. The way of works. All right, now this is as much of the history lesson as we're going to get here. The way of works began when Hinduism began. Basically, Hinduism started when you had Aryan people, this race of people called the Aryans. And this is not like Adolf Hitler's Aryans. This is different. There's this race of Aryan people, basically kind of Middle Eastern people, who moved into the Indus Valley, which is northwestern India. So hang on a second. Let me, all right. There's a neat little pointer thing. Everybody see that? Yeah, so you had them probably coming from somewhere around, these Aryan people, somewhere around Afghanistan area, coming through Pakistan, and down here into the Indus Valley. Now, at the same time, you had some taking a different religious belief called Zoroastrianism further west. But you had as Aryans coming down into India, and as they came, they began to conquer people, and as they conquered people, they brought their religious beliefs with them. And the conquered people began to pick up on these beliefs and practices. Well, this led way to the way of works, which, like I said, is very much ritualistic focused on the things you do. And really that gave a sense of power to the Aryan conquerors. It kind of kept the people under them in their place. Well, this is how you're supposed to adhere to it. We're the priest. You listen to us. You follow our religion this way. So it gave them a sense of power in that regard. After that, about 500, you have the way of knowledge come about, which is like a rebellion against that. People didn't like the strict, rigid form of ritual in the way of works. So they began focusing on a more mystical approach. The way of knowledge, basically, you were supposed to, by doing this, you were supposed to achieve moksha, which means you get out of the cycle of reincarnation. They believe when you die, you're just born again over and over again. And you got to get out of that and get into nirvana, which is like this perfect bliss, like a state of heaven, but it's not the same thing. And they believe that you do this basically through being a hermit, getting out of society, and spending all your time meditating. A lot of people don't follow the way of knowledge anymore just because the demands of it are so strict. It's so time-consuming. And finally, the way of devotion. Way of devotion emphasized... It got away from the strict rigidness of the way of works, and it got away from the very high standards of the way of knowledge, and it got into this it's simple devotion. You just devote yourself to one god or goddess is what they believed. So basically, this is a big henotheistic movement in Hinduism. Now, the reason I put a picture of a baby monkey holding on to its mother is because this is the analogy that they use. They say basically Bhakti Hinduism, or the way of devotion, you're supposed to cling to your god or goddess like a baby monkey clings to its mother. You're supposed to devotion to one, and that's how you achieve moksha, is by just devotion to one god or goddess. Now, in this, there are three main schools of Hinduism. Vishnu, they worship Vishnu as the main god, or Shiva, that's the most popular one. They worship Shiva as the main god, or where they worship several, or one of several goddesses, basically. Okay, any questions so far? All right, let's talk about some of the essential Christian doctrine versus Hinduism. This is where we see where it's really different, and we're only going to talk about 3 of the essential Christian doctrine of the 5 we gave you. First off, belief in God. Now, of course, Christians believe there's one God, Trinitarian in nature, and he's the creator of the whole universe. Now, like I said, Hinduism, you're nailing Jello to a wall, but you get everything from a lot of gods to believing that creation is God, to believing that the God of the Bible is just one of many gods. It's easy for them to accept. I mean, they already worship, 187 gods, so what's one more, right? And that's a big barrier in trying to reach Hindus with the gospel, actually. Okay, essential Christian doctrine and belief, our belief about Jesus. Now, of course, as Christians, we believe that Jesus is the Son of God. We believe he's God incarnate. We believe he's both human and divine. Now, Hindus believe, you'll find many Hindus who will say that Jesus is the Son of God, but they don't mean the same thing we mean when they say Son of God. We talk about us being the Son of God, or God, Jesus being the Son of God, and us being children of God, And in Christian thought, there's a big difference between those two. Jesus, as the Son of God, has a special status, a special being, separate and apart from us as children of God. Hinduism does not believe that. They think that Jesus was the Son of God, just like us. Or some of them do believe that he's just another God. Like I said, they have no problem getting one of many, taking one more God on. And finally, Christian belief about salvation. Of course, we believe that salvation is eternity with God. They believe that salvation is nirvana. Basically, you move into a state, your soul moves into a state of, I don't want to say non-existence, but basically you just kind of lose your individual identity and float off into the universe, something like that. And of course, we believe we are saved by grace through faith. Hindus believe that basically they do enough good works, they eliminate enough bad karma, they come to enough self-realization. That's how they are saved. So very different on those matter. Okay. Any questions so far? I'm getting some funny looks. Is this making sense? Did I say something crazy that didn't make sense? Okay. It seems rather strange. It's very, even when you consider a group like Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons, something that's very different, it's still a Western philosophy. So it still has sort of this touch and hint of Christian ideas in it. But when you go out east, you really lose a lot of that. So it's somewhat confusing to us. And it can be confusing even to Eastern people too, actually. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about a few general beliefs here. There was a big thing that came about in the way of knowledge, and you'll still find Hindus that adhere to this philosophy. Many of them do. It's the idea that basically a lot of the things around you don't really exist. They believe, we kind of take it for granted that, these pews and these walls and this microphone and me and you, that we exist. Not so much in Hinduism. You get a little bit different view of the world. So they believe that there is this force called Brahman, and everything that is Brahman. Basically, Brahman is God, and they believe that everything that is Brahman, and then everything that is not Brahman is what's called Maya, M-A-Y-A, Maya. And so you either have, everything falls under one or two categories, Brahman or Maya. And they think that Maya is not necessarily non-existent, it's just sort of a deception and illusion, something like that. So they believe most of the things around us are very much not there. They're a deception. They're just meant to kind of throw us off, almost like you're in the Matrix, if you've seen the movie The Matrix. So this also emphasized that deep inside every single person, there's something called the Atman, and the Atman is basically Brahman. It's the Brahman in you. And you reach salvation, you move into nirvana once you realize this Atman, and the Atman releases and moves back into the Brahman. So basically, you realize everything around you isn't real, and that only what's deep inside you is real, and that what's deep inside you is God, and you move back into this being with God. It's very strange sounding, right? Not just me? Okay. That's something you will find Hindus believing today. As far as Hindu sacred writings go, every group we've looked at so far has had some sort of writing that they considered sacred apart from the Bible. That's one of the key characteristics of a cult, is they have an extra biblical religious book. For Hindus, it is something called the Vedas. Now, the Vedas is actually 4 books. They're like compilations. Best analogy I could give is like the book of Psalms in the Bible. Psalms was not written through Psalm 1 to Psalm 150, right? It was compiled. A lot of different Psalms were written, and then they were compiled together into one book of Psalms. That's what each of the 4 book of Vedas are. They're like all these compilations. And there are a lot of other, of course. Now, the Vedas were originally, they came out of Aryan society, those people that came in and began conquering the people in India there. So they came with them. And they have a lot of other writings. They have commentaries on the Vedas, and they have, I got them listed, there's a million other writings that many Hindus will consider inspired or they consider scriptural. But the real core of it are the Vedas. By the way, L. Ron Hubbard, we talked about before, with Scientology. The guy who founded Scientology, he was obsessed for some reason with the Vedas. He cited them all the time. And he'd like cite them and compare them to the Bible, even though they're like night and day. But he was very fascinated with Eastern philosophies for some reason. Okay, questions or comments so far? All right. Talk about some real important core beliefs in Hinduism. These are ones you're going to see come out in the culture, really affect things big time. First is reincarnation. What's reincarnation? Yep, you die and then you come back, right? Do you like my comic? I thought that was pretty clever. Little kid. When I was your age, I didn't believe in reincarnation either, right? Okay. Yeah, so Hindus believe that when a person dies, they're born back into another body. Now, that body may be another person. It may be, if you're a man, it may be a woman. It may be a person in another country. It may be a fruit fly. I mean, you could come back as anything. And they believe that this is all determined based on the concept of karma. You've probably heard the word karma before. It's determined on karma. Basically, how much good or bad you do is going to affect what body you come back into. Now, to a lot of Western people, we look at that concept of reincarnation and think, oh, that means I never really die. That sounds great. That's almost like heaven. That's not their concept of heaven. To them, reincarnation is a bad thing. You're caught in a cycle where you're constantly born over and over and over and over and over again. And salvation is getting out of that cycle and just kind of molding into Brahman, this existence out there. They want to get out of this cycle. And of course, you got to do that through getting rid of bad karma and acquiring good karma. So let's talk about karma. What is karma? When you guys think of, as Western Americans, when you guys think of the concept of karma, what do you think of? Yeah, basically, yeah. It's almost a deceptive concept because it sounds a lot like the Christian concept of you reap what you sow. It's not the same, though. On the surface, it sounds the same, but when you get down to it, it's really not. Karma is, they believe that karma is this impersonal force. It's not a god. It's not a justice done by a god. It's just this force that just happens to be working in the world. Again, you get good karma. You can be reincarnated as something really good, like someone high in the caste system, or a man, right? Ladies? Or a poodle. Some poodles, yes, actually had it pretty good. So, yeah, sorry, ladies, but the reason you're women is because you were just a little less good than what you could have been in your last life. So you'd be a man if you were a little bit better before. Okay. But bad karma is going to get you reincarnated as something bad. Now, the way you get rid of bad karma is by suffering. You're born into a bad life, a bad situation, and you suffer through it. And that's how you get rid of bad karma. And that pays for all the bad things you did. Now, there's a few problems with this concept of karma. First off, and you'll see this in Hindu or Buddhism too, this produces a lot of fear in people because you have no idea what you did in your past life. You don't know how good you were. You don't know how bad you were. You don't know how much more bad karma you have to work off. You don't know how much good karma. You have no idea. So you're constantly afraid. What's going to happen? Now, compare that with the Christian concept of, all of our wrong deeds are paid for in Christ. We don't have to worry about it. But the concept of karma is actually quite frightening. For all you know, you could have done something a few lives back, and now next time you're born, you're going to be a worm. There's no way around it. So it's really kind of scary. The other thing is karma is actually, sad to say, a lot of people use it as a license to do pretty bad things, basically to not help people who need it. If you ever read anything that's produced by Central India Christian Mission, you will find that's one of the big battles they fight, is against this belief in karma. There are people in Hindu society who are very low down. If they're born with a deformity or a problem, the assumption is, well, it's because you did something bad in your last life. It's karma, and you deserve this. And so people stay away from you because they assume, well, you've got a lot of bad karma. They won't help you because they think in helping you, you're not suffering enough, and so you're not working off this bad karma. So the best thing I can do is let you suffer. A lot of bad things happen as a result of this concept of karma. And that's actually why Christianity can be effective among lower class Hindus, because they'll show them compassion and love when their own people, their own countrymen won't. So, questions or comments on karma? That's a big one. Yes. If you know any Hindus who are even semi-serious about their faith, they won't eat beef. My friend in high school, he's not that serious. He's not that observant, but he won't touch beef. He doesn't mind if I eat beef. We go to restaurants and he's put something on my plate and says, eat that and tell me if it's beef. And I say, I don't know, I can't tell. But yeah, they won't eat beef. Really devout ones won't even eat won't eat anything but vegetables. But yeah, Hindus have a very high respect for cows. I'm not 100% sure why. Now, a lot of people say they worship cows. I don't think that's actually the case. Maybe somewhere there's a Hindu who worships cows. I don't know. But yeah, a lot of it is sort of a respect thing. We don't eat horses here, right? They don't eat cows. Not that we know. Some of these restaurants you don't know, though. But yeah, some of it is an ancestor thing, I think. I'm not sure why they single out cows over any others. Again, it may be a nailing Jello to a wall. Some Hindus believe this about cows. Some believe this over here. Some believe, you shouldn't eat beef because just of respect. Some believe you shouldn't eat any meat because it's ancestors. I'm not really sure, but there is certainly a huge respect and a fear of harming cows. So, yeah. Any other questions or comments? Sorry, Dan, I can't give you a very solid answer for that. I don't know too much about it. I'm learning a lot of these Far Eastern religions. I'm learning them as I'm teaching them, so it's part of the reason it's taking a while. Nothing else? Okay. One more general belief to talk about, and this is an important one, and that's the caste system. Anybody know what the caste system is? Yeah, it's basically where you structure society now. Here we any society, you're going to have these differences. You're going to have lower class, middle class, upper class. You're going to have all these. The difference is, in our society, if you're in a lower class, the assumption is not that you deserve it, necessarily. In our society, we believe a person who's in a lower class should be able to work and get up to an upper class. Indian society, they don't believe this. These class distinctions are extremely, extremely strict. And again, the reason is karma. If you're born into a poor family, you deserve it because you did something bad. If you're born... So, these class distinctions, in Hindu society, they are rigid because they assume you deserve it. And if you're born into a high caste, the highest caste up there, the Brahmins, that's the priestly caste. You have to be born in the Brahmin caste to be a priest. So that's the highest one. And if you're there, you deserve it. It's because you're a good person and you're really close to making it into nirvana. Yeah. So this is absolutely essential to Hinduism. Okay. You may notice if you know anything about Buddhism, there's a lot of similar beliefs. They both believe in reincarnation. They both believe in karma, Hinduism and Buddhism. But Buddhists are considered heretical Hindus for this reason. Buddhists don't accept the caste system. Hindus do. Originally, this caste system was sort of I believe it was sort of like a political, societal control thing. As these Aryan people came in and conquered India, and they were putting these native Indian people down under them, well, they developed these castes because, well, you're in that caste, you belong in that caste, you stay in your place, and you serve me. It helped them kind of keep society structured the way that they wanted it to. And it's carried on for 3,500 years. So, it's kind of a big deal. Any questions or comments about that so far? By the way, what you find, you ever, well, those four castes break down into smaller groups as well, and will break down into smaller family names. You ever met a Hindu person whose last name is Patel? You've heard of that before? It's a really common one. That's that third class there. That's basically the merchant class. They come out, all the Patels come out of that class. And usually, what do you see them doing when they're in America? What do you see them doing? Motels, sometimes gas stations. And you know what? Usually, they're pretty decent business people. That's the caste they're born into. They're taught, and that is ingrained in them from the time they're born. You be in this caste, you're a business person. Okay. Questions or comments so far? All right. Let's talk about some barriers to the gospel. This will be one of the last things. And we'll just talk about how to reach Hindus. Now, there's a lot of barriers when it comes to a Hindu person coming to a knowledge of Christ. Understand this, that Hinduism is as much a cultural and ethnic belief as it is a religious belief. In fact, the word Hindu is not a name that was come up with by Hindu people. The word literally means religion of India. And that's what it is, Indian. Now, you have some Hindus outside of India, obviously, but the culture all goes back to this core Indian culture. Okay? So, understand something. For a person here in the U.S. to become a Christian, it's really not that big of a deal. It's not that difficult. You don't lose much here, typically speaking. Now, there are exceptions. When a Hindu person becomes a Christian, there is a lot of pressure. They feel like they are abandoning their whole culture, their whole nation, their whole background, everything. It's a lot of incentive. This really takes seriously the words of Jesus, take up your cross and follow me. You got to give everything up to follow Christ. Well, that's very true of Hindu people because they're sacrificing quite a bit to follow him. Okay, there are a lot of theological barriers to Hindus becoming Christians. Okay, like I said, there's strong polytheistic influence and pantheistic and henotheistic and all these different influences affecting a Hindu person. And because of all this polytheism, a Hindu person has no problem believing that Jesus is a god. You could go over to India on a mission trip and you could start speaking with some Hindu people and talk to them about Jesus. They say, oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I accept Jesus. Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, I'm good with that. It's just that simple. Well, they're not giving up on Hindu religious belief. They're just incorporating Jesus into it. That's kind of how Hinduism became a big, that's part of how Hinduism came about. But, by the way, you guys see this picture of a temple. See all those statues on the temple up there? Those are all Hindu gods, idols, statues of gods. Now, estimates are that there are 33 million Hindu gods. Now, that number is inflated because there'll be like 4 or 5 that share, like one that has like 4 or 5 different names, but there's a lot of Hindu gods. And this is what they've grown up knowing. There are almost as many gods as people. And that's a big thing for them to get out of. By the way, these statues on there, those are not considered technically idols, but Hindus do have idols. They'll have like a statue of their of a god that they worship somewhere. And I've just pieced it together recently, but my Hindu friend, he had a little statuette. I thought it was just like a little, decoration. He had a little statuette on the dash of his car that he drove of one of his Hindu gods, of the god Ganesha. And he kept this in his car. And I never thought much of it, except now I understand a little more about Hindus. They actually, when we say people worship idols, a lot of times what we mean is they think that there's a god somewhere and that idol just looks like that god or represents that god and they worship that god. Hindus actually worship the idol itself, the statue that is made out of stone. They believe that the god is in the statue. And that you have to actually put food before the statue. You have to clean and take care of the statue and provide a home for that god, and that's how you get their favor. So they have some pretty different beliefs from us theologically speaking. Also, a big thing with Hinduism that, karma, caste, everything, but pluralism is a huge barrier for them. Christianity has never had a good track record in terms of being accepted by pluralistic societies. Ironically, societies that pride themselves on accepting everything have historically always hated Christianity because Christianity is too narrow for them. We believe in one God. We believe in Jesus Christ alone. That is a challenge for many of these societies. And when they're in a pluralistic mindset, very hard to overcome that. Okay, questions or comments? Anybody have a weak stomach in here? If you do, don't look at this next picture, okay? But I'll have it up here. There's also another barrier to the gospel is pagan mindsets. You can see this person here. Those are skewers going through their cheeks and out of their mouths. That is a very common, very normal Hindu worship practice. There's a holiday where they will go to a temple and have these skewers and needles and all sorts of things stuck into their face and through the cheeks of their mouths. and that's considered sort of like an act of devotion towards their god. Now, not all Hindus would approve of that. Obviously, some would find that, barbaric. But Hinduism has its roots in some pretty bad, some of the worst religious practices ever devised. Human sacrifice was actually practiced in India until British occupation, a while back, and Britain banned it. But human sacrifice was still what was practiced there. Self-mutilation, things like that. There was a practice, I think it's called sati, when an Indian man died. If his wife was still alive, he was burned on a funeral pyre, and she was burned with him alive. And there were times that was even forced on some Indian women, until, again, the British government banned that. And there was actually a missionary, I can't remember, he's a really famous missionary. He was instrumental in actually influencing and helping to stop that practice. He's really well known. I can't remember his name now. Anyway, but understand this is true of any other religious belief. This is not just different ideas. This is not just my thoughts and your thoughts, and we're going to see whose thoughts are better. I mean, this is spiritual warfare. This is something, we're fighting it. When we try to convince people to come to Christ, we're fighting a spiritual battle. And there are a lot of forces that hold people back away from that. Okay. Questions or comments so far? Okay. Real quick, we'll talk about how to reach Hindus, but first, why should we care about reaching Hindu people? Yeah, Jesus loves the Hindu people. He really does. Of course, number one, be patient. You saw all those barriers. You saw how different it is. It takes a while. Know that many Hindus are nominal. Not every Hindu is going to go out there and stick stuff in his face, and not every Hindu is going to be bowing down and kissing a statue. But there's nominal ones, but it's cultural as well. It's deeply rooted in them. Be respectful. I told you about my high school friend. His name was Jay. And I had another friend named Frank, who's Presbyterian now, and Frank would actually tease my friend Jay about his Hindu faith. We'd be at a restaurant eating something, and he'd say, "Better make sure you're not eating any beef, Jay. Don't want to eat one of your ancestors." Okay, that doesn't convince anybody of their need for Christ. Of course, be respectful. Understand what leaving Hinduism entails. It's a big step. It's not easy. Be generous. Generosity goes very far with that culture, with that background, that mindset. Generosity is very well received. Be generous. Take time to get to know them, because like I said, you're nailing Jello to a wall. Every Hindu is going to be different. And live the Christian life well. Questions or comments on Hinduism? Here's sources. You can borrow them after we're done with this class if you want. Any questions, comments, anything? Okay.